I incline my ear to a proverb. I'm going to teach you something in the context of this worship that will help you live life, that will help direct you in the way that you should go. I will solve my riddle to the music of the lyre. Not lyre like I've told a lie, but the lyre, L-Y-R-E, like the predecessor to the guitar. I'm going to solve my riddle to music. He's like, I'm going to put this confusing thing to a song so that you can understand. And then he starts right off with the biggest question for us to actually hold on to out of this whole thing. Why should I fear? Why? Why? Why should we fear? We realize that we got this wonderful reality of where this whole thing is going, and we're talking about these wicked people who seem to have all this wealth and everything's going really good for them, but there's this juxtaposition to where they're going to end up eternally, right? These weren't people who were living their lives out in confidence clearly in the Hebrew faith, where they were in the temple and they were doing their sacrifices because they were so clearly being said they're going to be lost to Sheol. They're not connected to God. There's no relationship here, but yet they seem to prosper. And the psalmist says, it's a riddle as to why this is allowed to happen, but just stick with me. I'm going to explain it. I'm going to explain how this works. Randy Alcorn, many of you have read his book, just titled simply Heaven. He has a quote in there which is, I'm sure he didn't say it first, but I'm using him because that's the quote that I wrote down. The best of life on earth is a glimpse of heaven. The worst of life is a glimpse of hell. For Christians, this present life is the closest they will ever come to hell, right? For unbelievers, this is the closest they will ever come to heaven. And we realize that as the psalmist is working through this process, this is what he's unpacking. He's unpacking the reality that we are laying up treasure, and this is going to sound like something maybe you've heard before. We're laying up treasure in this life for the next, right? For those of us that know we're going to spend eternity with God the Father, we're told to lay up treasure in heaven that will not rust or decay, right? So what does that mean? Not the stuff that we want and most people want here. There's a common kind of story about the J.D. Rockefeller when he died. He at the time was the richest man in all of the world. And the lawyers go in and they're dealing with the will and all that kind of stuff. And the lawyer comes out to talk to the family. And the family looks at this lawyer, realizing that they're all in for a great inheritance. And they say, how much did he leave? And the lawyer looks at them and says, well, all of it, because you can't take it with him. Right? Like he didn't get, like it's all still here. None of it went with them, unless you're got some kind of weird, really big casket that you put everything in with you and get buried with it. It's there for the next generation. It's there for the next people. We don't take that with us. And the reality is, if we're told to lay up treasure in heaven, but yet we know that we're going to actually go through a physical death and transition to eternity because of what Christ did for us on the cross, and we're laying up treasure there, what is the treasure? Non-rhetorical question. What is the treasure? People. People. The only thing we can take with us is people. Right? You don't get your house, you don't get your car, you don't get your well-manicured lawn, you don't get all your tools or stuff that you use for your hobbies. You don't get any of that with you. They pale in comparison to what we're going to experience in heaven anyway. But what we do get to take with us is people. Not because of anything that we do, but because of the way that we live. The way that we point our lives towards Christ, and the way that people interact with that reality, right? This is what the psalmist is about to go on about for the next 15 verses. Is how do we actually live a life that causes us to store up treasure where it matters and do the right thing with the treasure that we actually have here in this world, right? We all, just by virtue of looking out here, I'm going to look around the room and go, okay, I feel like I'm safe saying this. We all have a little bit extra. Some of us have a little more than others, and some of us have a little less than others, and that's totally okay. But we have extra, right? Like, I look around the room, and if I'm wrong, please come talk to me and we can help. But I don't think anybody's really worried about where lunch is coming from, right? We've got that sorted. We live in an economically wealthy position for ourselves, and we realize that the psalmist is telling there's a limit on the stuff that we end up having. There's a whole bunch of things that he says can't be bought. Verses 5 through 9. Why should I fear in times of trouble, when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me? Those who trust in their wealth boast of their abundance of their riches. Truly no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life. You can't buy your way to heaven. There's people that have to actually hear that because they think that they can make it, right? I'm a good person. The scales of balance are going to work out okay for me. I am way better than I am bad, right? When you take all of my bad traits and put them over here, all of my good stuff outweighs that. And, every once in a while, I do nice things for people, so it's even better, right? We have people that think that way. I've been told that by people that I love and that I care about, that I share faith with. I'm a good person. God will let me in. But you don't believe that Jesus died on the cross for you or that he's God's son. No. Okay, well, we got a problem, right? Here the psalmist says, no one can truly ransom another or give to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice, that he should live on forever and never see the pit. Even the psalmist here is saying, look, the cost of our life is huge. Huge. There's nothing we can do to pay God for our lives to keep us out of the pit. This is all God's mercy and grace. This is all his redemption reconciliation process. In the Old Testament, they believed it happened through sacrifices. So they had this process of keeping accounts where God had said, shed blood from an animal, I will forgive you. Now, the magical blood inside of the animal wasn't the thing, right? It's not what caused them to be saved. It was the promise that God had made that caused them to bring the blood of the animal to the altar. But the animal there was nothing special about it. It was the covenant. It was the promise that God had made about that process. So even as the psalmist is writing this, he's saying, nobody ransoms himself to God. Just because I killed a sheep last week and kept my accounts close, I did all that I was required to do as far as the law is concerned, it's still up to God to decide that he's forgiving us, right? It's still his prerogative in that process. The psalmist is saying that. On this side of the cross, it's even bigger for us, isn't it? Because no one can find our way out. Please don't bring sheep to church. I'm not going to do that. I grew up on a farm. I've slaughtered animals. I can do it. I've got the stomach for it. But I'm not going to do it. It's going to be messy, and this building will stink. And it's going to be weird. And I just don't want to have to deal with dead animals all day long. I'm so happy we live on this side of the cross. But you know what I'm more happy about? That people find out who Jesus is and what he did on the cross. That negates needing to bring those animals in. That negates it all because he shed his blood on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins. The psalmist didn't understand that. But it still rings true today. No man ransoms another or gives to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice, that he should live on forever and never see the pit. Jesus was able to do that because of who he was. The perfect and sinless life that he lived, and what can't be bought. The one thing that the psalmist is talking about, saying doesn't matter how rich you are, you can't buy your way out of death. We actually have a way to get out of it. Someone has paid the price. He lived a perfect and sinless life. He died on the cross, shed his blood once and for all for forgiveness of all sins for the people who call on his name. Amen? That's what changes everything in this psalm for us as we stand on this side of the cross. There's a list of stuff that we can't buy. Kidner, who writes commentaries that I read, the ransom picture is doubly appropriate, since being held to ransom is as much as the hazard of the very rich as redemption is the need of the very poor, right? It doesn't matter your station in life. We could line everybody up and figure out who's the wealthiest and who's the poorest. We line them all up in the whole world. And do you know where the need for Jesus starts and ends? At the start of the line and at the end of the line. Everybody needs him. There is no get out of jail. You can't be poor enough that God sees pity and mercy and just gets you out of the sin requirements. And nobody's wealthy enough to buy their way out of it. We all need to be redeemed. We all need to be ransomed from death. We all need to be brought back in. And that redemption was costly for God as he sent his only son to the cross. As we continue on and we kind of hit verse 10, things start to change a little bit. And the psalmist starts to talk about wealth and the next life. So verses 10 to 12. For he sees that even the wise die, the fool and the stupid alike must perish. I'm glad that you can find yourself in those three. The wise, the fool, or the stupid. Everybody's perishing. They leave their wealth to others. Their graves and their homes forever. Their dwelling places to all generations. Though they call lands by their own names, man in his pomp will not remain. He is like the beast that perish. Psalmist kind of looks at it and it just sort of says, we don't have much of a legacy, right? As far as what's going to be left behind, there's not much there. There talks about the wealth will be left to others in a very short period of time, unless you leave an incredible amount of wealth. Because, you still hear people like, oh, how did so-and-so get rich? Well, that was his grandfather's money, right? That was his great-grandfather's money. Oh, their family came from, and they name whatever industry it came from. You got to be of a substantial amount of wealth for it to last even just a generation, your name, right? So we lose that. You don't have any legacy as far as your wealth goes. Their graves are their homes forever, right? So the mansions and places that get built, if you pay attention to the crazy sales that happen, say, in Hollywood, they don't talk about who actually built the place. They don't talk about all the people who live there. They just talk about the person who's given it up and why they can't afford it anymore, right? The stuff that we amass, the things that we create, the psalmist says, these are what are going to be our grave. These are the things that are going to kill us. Because they become something that takes our affection away from the place that it should be. Or it actually clouds our sight so that we believe that we're getting somewhere while we get nowhere. Right? Hence the reason that he says, the wise die, but so do the fool and the stupid. And clearly the psalmist is beginning to say, when you fall for the things of this world, when your affections land heavy into the things of this world, your wealth, the stuff you have, psalmist is clearly dropping you into the fool and the stupid. Because the wise are holding on to something different. They're still going to die, but they're holding on to something very, very different in the relationship with God. Wealth is absolutely unreliable for us. It makes us feel comfortable. It gives us a false sense of power. We think that we're in control of our own destiny, and none of it. C.S. Lewis wrote, prosperity knits a man into this world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, well, really the world is finding its place in him. Right? The world grabs a hold of us and stops us from thinking about and fixating on the right things. We become the foolish and the stupid rather than the wise, as far as the psalmist is concerned. So we realize that there's two paths to death. Verse 13 says, this is the path of those who have foolish confidence, yet after them people approve of their boasts. So here are the people that run after all of this wealth, and they run their way towards death because they see all of this wealth. But then there's the second layer. Yet after them people approve of their boasts. That's the second wave of people who follow behind going, oh man, that guy with all the money, he is doing everything just right. I want to be like him. And I want to follow. They might never amass the same kind of wealth. They might not have the same kind of influence and power in this world. But what they do want is what they have. And they chase their whole lives after it. And the psalmist says there's two ways for us to get down this path. One is to actually be leading the way, amassing the wealth, and where everyone looks at you. And the second way is to just be looking at all of that wealth and power and authority in this world and becoming mesmerized by it. Saying that's where I will find my worth. That's where I will be taken. Martin Luther said, whatever a man loves is his God. I'm going to repeat the first part of that because I yet have to be proved this wrong. Whatever a person loves, I won't let the ladies off the hook this time. Whatever a person loves, that is their God. For he carries it in his heart. He goes about with it day and night. He sleeps with it. He wakes with it. Be it what it may. Wealth or self or pleasure or renown. Whatever you love is what you worship. And so often we get sidetracked by this world. And this is what the psalmist is talking about. All of these people that he's talking about, they've been sidetracked by their wealth. And they look at their wealth and they go, this is amazing. How much more do I need? Just a little bit more. Right? That was Henry Ford was asked, how much is enough? $1 more. I want $1 more. That's all that drove him his whole life, was amassing wealth so that he could die and take none of it with him. Luther looks at that and says, whatever you love, that's your God. Lots of times counselors will say things like, show me your checkbook, I will tell you what you love, and then show you what you worship, right? It's where our money goes. It's where our time goes. It's where our energy goes. It's what we do with all of those things. Now, money's not a bad thing, okay? We'll put that right out there. The psalmist is looking at it saying when you're mesmerized by your wealth and that's all you fixate on, that's a bad thing. If God pours out blessing on you and you become wealthy for whatever reason, as long as it's honorable reasons, because if it's not honorable, then we got a different problem. But if you have wealth and you use it to honor and glorify God with all that you do, even though you have lots, that's okay, right? It's totally okay. Another one of the commentaries, and I didn't write down his name, but it says, money is the monarch of this world, but not the next. Right? So when you have money in this world, there's an authority and a power and an influence that you have. The question becomes, how do you use it? What do you do with it? That was the theme, is how do we bring our wealth to God? How do we do this in a way that brings glory and honor to Him? How do we do this in a way that keeps us from being on this path that we find in verse 13, where it's the foolish have confidence in the wealth that they have in this world, or you look at people who are wealthy and you wish that you could be them, and you chase after as much of that as you can, and we forget about the path that actually leads us to heaven, which is through the cross. So if you happen to be in this world and you happen to have wealth and you happen to fixate your heart on the cross and put all of your attention and focus towards Jesus, and you use those things for gospel ministry, and you're not afraid of that, you don't fall into the stupid and foolish, you fall into the wise. It's not a bad thing to have wealth. It's a bad thing to be fixated on that wealth. Verses 14 and 15 say, like sheep they are pointed for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd. The upright shall rule over them in the morning. Their form shall be consumed in Sheol with no place to dwell. But God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for He will receive me. If you're one of those people that likes to put little notes in your Bible, star that one. Verse 15. We found the gospel. God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol. God will ransom me from death. He will receive me. You want out of this world? You want to amass the ability to go on in eternity? Find Christ. Understand who He is. Submit to His lordship and receive it. Right? If you don't, enjoy your wealth while you have it now. It will end. It's actually a very simple, you can't get much more black and white than this. The world desperately tries to make it a gray area. Desperately. But they can't, because of verse 15. God will ransom my soul. You want your soul ransomed? You want a way out of this world for eternity? God is the only place you're going to find it. There is no other place. James Boyce, another commentary that I was reading, we must remember that to redeem something is a commercial term. You cut out a coupon, you take it to the store, and you redeem it. You hand it in for something else, like you get money off or you get something free. We must remember that to redeem something is a commercial term, meaning to buy or to buy out. Spiritually, it refers to God's work in buying us out of sin's marketplace and setting us free. We are set free because of what God has done in redeeming us. Who can do this? No one but God. Right? Last night, as I sat out on our little, porch with the screen around it and the light on, and listened to the thunder and lightning coming in and the rain starting to fall, one quote that isn't actually, I've written it over on the side. It wasn't part of my sermon. I started rewriting, so this is like a mishmash of notes up here. Jim Elliot, he's one of those missionaries that when I became a Christian, I was enamored with the missionaries that really risked their necks, right? Went out into the wild places and were on that cutting edge of being out on the edge of where the gospel has gone. Jim Elliot was part of the group that flew a plane into the Amazon jungle, and they found what was called the Wadani tribe. I've read all I can about them, and I did it from a young age. Crazy people. They didn't even have a word for grandfather because nobody made it there. They didn't have anybody who was actually a grandfather, so they didn't have to know what the term grandfather was because you were murdered before you got there. That's the savageness of these people. When they were going to fly in and actually land, clearly his wife and kids were a little tentative. They're like, should we be doing this? And he had that quote, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain which he cannot lose." It's a great quote. Until you start thinking about it. What is he willing to gain? Cannibalistic headhunters. That's what he's willing to gain. What can't he lose? Eternity. Right? His son who later, wrote books and later went back to the same tribe and did missions work and all that kind of stuff. He was told by his dad right at the last thing is, "I'm ready. I've heard the gospel. They haven't. Somebody has to go tell them. Why not me?" And so they landed, and if you get a book and read it, I've got one at home if you want to borrow it. They landed, and it didn't take long, but I think it's 5 guys died in like one afternoon. And that set me to thinking last night, and when I do that, I end up Googling stuff, and I read a book last night on the Cannibal Valley in Irian Jaya. And the reason I did this is because after I became a Christian, I was discipled by a guy named Harold Caddo. He was one of the guys in the church. He was an older fella. He was probably in his 70s at that time, and I was terrified of him because he was a big strapping dude who could still, he still went to work bees and all that kind of stuff, and he got stuff done. And then you start to hear his stories about walking into the Cannibal Valley in Irian Jaya, where Tribe A and Tribe B could kind of talk to each other, but Tribe C hated Tribe A, and Tribe B sort of liked Tribe C, but didn't really like Tribe. And he was the guy trying to push that line of gospel. And he actually had this whole miming gospel thing where he would go through the creation story. He would take them through the redemption narrative. He would take them through the covenants. He would bring them all the way to the end where he would get to the cross and salvation. And he was like, I had to do all of this when we're in actions because there was no guarantee that they would understand anything I was saying when we first started. And he's got stories of being chased by guys who didn't like the look of them. He's got stories about as they were sharing this gospel message, they didn't like the story, so you had to run. You had to run for your life. He hid under a tree, he told me one time, for 2 days while they searched the area trying to find him to kill him. He would tell the gospel story, and they would love it so much they wanted to celebrate, so then they would drag a captive out of the cage, and they would cook him and eat him right there in front of them. The path to death is dizzying in this world. And the only way to turn people off of that is through gospel proclamation. Being willing to do whatever is necessary to share the gospel, to pull people away from this world. Away from this world and to put their affections on the cross. To understand what Christ has done. When we show up on a Sunday morning, on a Sunday where on Friday they told us we have to wear a piece of cloth over our mouth. And this is where I get angry. We fight over that, and it means nothing. Literally nothing. We have our affections pulled away from where it should be so often, and then we bicker with each other over the way we should or shouldn't do things, and all we do is lose our gospel message. That's all we do. And that, I don't know, there's no better way than number 10, for the wise see, and the fool and stupid alike must perish. Because we get sidetracked, we get pulled away, we get out there and we forget that God has already done all of the hard lifting. All of it. You literally have to do nothing hard to walk in your salvation and proclaim the gospel to your neighbors. Nothing. Nobody's going to murder you. Nobody is going to try to eat you. Right? That's why I started thinking about Harold and the stories that he used to tell me and these stories that I used to read about missionaries who were willing to lay it all out in the line. That's why I went on missions trips. That's why I wanted to be a missionary. And then God, by his grace, said, no, you're going to get married to her and you're going to stay in Canada. And that's what we did. She was going to be a missionary too. It's all right. It's okay. It's okay. But those stories still happen. There's still people who risk. There's still people who risk to share the gospel. They're willing to tell their bosses. They're willing to tell people who have power and influence over them, whether it be in jobs or family, relationally, whatever it might be. There is still risk for us to share. We're not going to lose our lives because of it, though. In verses 15, there's a little thing that you got to hear. God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. There's nobody in between that. Do you hear that? He will receive me. Face to face. Direct. There's no in between. This isn't God will send somebody to the airport and hold up the sign saying, hop in this limo, you'll get there. No, he's going to be there. When you're ransomed into the next world, into eternity, he will be there. The word to be received is actually the same one, and if you're a linguist scholar, you can look this up. I'm taking Kidner as in his word because I didn't look it up, but that word is the same meaning as when God took Enoch. I will take him. Direct, personal. When we're ransomed out of this world, when our days come to an end, whether your breath expires and you die or Jesus comes back, it will be personal, face-to-face with you. There is coming a day where you will see the face of your Savior, the face of your God. It will be your first day for the rest of eternity. And if that doesn't get you a little bit excited, I don't know what will. Like, honestly. Is that not what we live for? So then that question becomes, why don't we live to take as many people with us as possible? Why do we spend so much time making sure that we're well taken care of in this world, and we forget to take as many as we can into the next world so that they can be taken care of? Why do we bicker over weird and strange things to take our affections and our energies and our drive and push it to the side rather than straight down gospel proclamation avenue? Because that's all we're called to do. All. People should know where you are right now. Right? They shouldn't be thinking, oh man, that family's leaving to go golfing today again. Huh, they go every week. Committed. Right? They should know where you're going. Because you've talked to them about faith. You've talked to them about Christ. You're sharing it. You're living it out. We're not afraid. And that's where it goes at the end, verses 16 through 20. Be not afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house increases. For when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will go down after him. For though while he lives, he counts himself blessed, and though you are to get praise when you do well yourself, this is the psalmist saying, hey, when people get wealthy, the world praises them. There's that aside. When you get praise, when you do well for yourself as well. It's not a bad thing to become wealthy in this world. But verse 19, his soul will go down to the generation of his fathers who will never see light. Man in his pomp, yet without understanding, is like the beast that perishes. So don't be afraid when somebody amasses the wealth. Why should we not be afraid? Because the psalmist goes on and says, because his destination is secure if he trusts in that wealth. He's going to Sheol. So why should we not be afraid? Because the gospel message has more power than the wealth that he has. Because the gospel message and what Jesus did on the cross can change everything if we believe it. That's the hard part for us, if we believe it. Charles Spurgeon, the generality of man worships success, however it may be gained. The color of the winning horse is no matter. It's the winner, and that is enough. That's what the world chases after. I'm going to read 3 short verses, and then we're going to start into some more worship. Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 26. When Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? Right? Jesus says this exact same thing. People are going to get sidetracked with the world. If you follow me, don't get sidetracked, no matter what the world throws at you. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. I'm going to paraphrase it. It's the parable of the rich fool. Guy comes and says, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Jesus says, I'm not the judge. And then he gets to the end here in verse 19 and it says, and I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. That's what wealth does to you. You relax. You're comfortable. And that's what people usually amass their wealth for, so they can have some security, some safety, some comfort. Jesus says that. And then he starts in verse 20. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, those will they be. So this is the one who lays up treasure for himself is not rich towards God. Right? When we lay it up ourselves, when that becomes our security blanket, when we think that we're getting somewhere in this world because we've amassed some stuff, God himself says, you fool, this night your soul is required of you. And now all of a sudden that relationship with Christ is the more important, paramount thing. Mark chapter 10, verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus knew what he was doing, right? He was laying down his life. He was being the ransom. He was paying the price for us to get something for free, to redeem us. To redeem us from the power of sin, from the place that we belong, from that death that leads to Sheol, that place where we go where there is no more light, we only see darkness. Jesus provided that. And I plead with you, stop looking for your security anywhere else. You're not going to find it. You may find comfort. You may find some semblance of peace in this world. You may even think that you've got enough to survive the storms that are coming. But God says, you fool. Tonight you have a debt to pay that you can't pay if you haven't found Christ. So where does our hope and our security come from? It comes in Christ. So as we bring our wealth, that economics that we have in our world, what do we do with it? Give it to Jesus. It's just money. It's just stuff. It's just things. And it's not easy to do. Doesn't matter how much you have. That's not easy to do. It's not easy to let it go. It's not easy to give it away. It's not easy to work hard to gain it so that you can just turn around and give it away to somebody else or someone else, something else. But that's what we're called to do. Last quote from Spurgeon of the day. The banker rots as fast as the shoe black, which means this. And the peer becomes as putrid as the pauper. We're all destined to a death, and there's only one way through it for us. As we come to the communion table, this is one of those things where as we come to the cup, and you realize we do this to remember what Christ did for us. So the weekly nature of this is to remind us of what we're doing. Where are we? Why do we strive? Why do we fixate ourselves? What is going on? This is to remind ourselves to keep our affections and our eyes fixed on Christ. Because it's we're supposed to do this as often as we gather, right? So if you actually wanted to get real biblical on the term, we should do this every time any semblance of us is gathered together in the form of worship, regular. We're doing it every week. We should do it if we have prayer meetings. We should be doing it if we have barbecues. We should be doing it every single time. Because that's how quickly the eyes of our heart get fixated on the things of this world. So we're going to sing a song, and I would encourage you to, in the midst of it, think about your heart, where it is and where your affections lie. Orientate yourself towards Christ. Roger's at the back. If you need a cup, you can raise your hand, or he'll get it for you.